Okay, hello everybody. Good morning. My name's Dara. I'm a research nurse with UC Davis, and I'm really proud of being a research nurse with UC Davis until I listened to everything that City of Hope has. And I'm sitting there dwindling because we are nowhere near what you guys have, and it's extremely impressive. And I hope one day we can be there. I'm just going to give you my perspective. These are just some objectives that I want to show to you. I hope that you guys take some pearls about the nitty-gritty things that I have found that work better than others. So just understand the importance of a research nurse, roles that the research nurses can play, sometimes many roles all at the same time, the challenges of following the protocols, and hopefully provide some tools that I have found to help avoid deviation. So I was a bedside nurse doing BMT, HEMONC, inpatient for 15 plus years. This job is so much incredibly harder than that bedside role. Nothing is standard. You have these 200-page protocols that you have to read through. You have to pick out the pieces. Then you have to take that. Then you have to compare it to standard of care. And then you have to relay it to everybody else and make sure no deviations happen, that the patient feels supported, and X, Y, and Z. So I always joke that I have so many more gray hairs now than I did at bedside, not negating or diminishing bedside, because bedside is extremely difficult, but this is difficult in so many more matters. So I always go back to this quote when I get frustrated. And honestly, the science that we're doing right now is so amazingly impressive. But as the science gets better and better, the patients get sicker and sicker. So it makes everything even more complicated. So the roles of a research CRN, I think there are many. I play study coordinator. They can play study coordinator. You can do direct patient care, a nurse manager. You can do nurse education, patient education, clinical nurse specialists or APPs. I really do not think that there is enough. I'm going to stand on my soapbox for a hot second. I really do not think that there's enough strong clinical research nurses with HEMONC cellular therapy experience involved in clinical trials, and even lower number of APPs, whether that's CNSs or NPs. The numbers are tiny, but there's more and more and more trials that are coming, especially non-oncology trials that are coming. And then you have to bridge the gap and figure out how are you treating a non-oncology patient with an oncology therapy? And that requires an immense amount of education and infrastructure to make sure that patient doesn't fall between the gaps. So I delve in between each one of these roles all the time. And I feel like one of the best ways to show you guys my perspective, my view, is to walk you through what I do. So these slides are slightly different than what I had prepared, but I will go with it. So I start with study startup. So I am the only research nurse in my department in the Alpha Clinic. I am the only one nurse of 8 other cellular therapy specialists or CRCs or data managers. We do not have this beautiful infusion clinic that does clinical trial cellular therapy infusions for us. These patients go into the inpatient unit, Davis 8, and the hospital, or they go to sometimes our Ames clinic, which is our outpatient clinic, or they go to the infusion center. So I am the one running between trying to make sure that the patient is supported at all points of this time, and that make sure whoever's touching that patient, wherever they're going, through screening to eligibility to collection to infusion X, Y, or Z, that they feel supported, and whoever's touching that patient needs to know what they need to know for the trial. Good clinical practice needs to be at the center of all of that. I remember being a bedside nurse and having no education on the product that I was infusing, and it stressed me the heck out. Especially when you have 3 or 4 other patients that you're caring for that are sick, and then you're asked to do this very detailed cellular therapy infusion that you don't even know. It's a phase 1 first, that you're infusing this patient and there's nobody there to help you. And that's what I encountered. So that's why I was lucky enough to kind of create this job to avoid the stress that I had when I was at the bedside. So my goal for what I do is to make sure that the nurse is supported and that they don't feel like they don't have anyone to go to for questions. So maybe I'm a little overbearing sometimes, but I always insert myself there to make sure that the nurse is supported. I secure chat the nurses all the time. I put notes in EMR. And it's a lot of work, but I feel like it's what's best for the patient. And then at each time point, right, the patient comes to the clinic first, they go through screening, they go through eligibility, they get consented first, then they go through those things. And then apheresis, like especially if you're collecting a non-oncology patient for pemphigus vulgaris or myasthenia gravis or lupus, those patients have no idea what they're walking into. So, and no offense to the CRC that's not strong with cellular therapy, right? They know their department. So I'm there to make sure that the patient understands what they're signing up for. Do they need a line for collection? They need to understand why they need that. All those things. Make sure all the checklists X, Y, or Z are all done. And then, so communication and education, I think, is extremely important. As I said, I send a lot of emails. I use a lot of Teams. I like in person, seeing people's faces, talking to them, explaining things. I created this thing called RN worksheets that I'll go over in a minute. Use EMR to its fullest. We use Encore as our CTMS system, which is okay, but it's not beautiful. And then communicating with the patient all the time. I'm always texting patients. I know sometimes you're not supposed to do that, but it's the best way to communicate with them. And then since we're separate, we have our BMT nurses and then we have the Alpha Clinic. So I'm in the middle, making sure everybody is talking to each other and that the BMT nurses know what they need to do for their standard of care. And then the CRC knows what they need to do for their screening and trial stuff. And so that nothing gets overlapped, we follow standard of care and that we follow the protocol. And then the bedside staff, I communicate with the bedside staff all the time whenever we have a patient inpatient or if the patient's in infusion or if the patient's in the clinic. I like to go to the clinic visits to check on the patient if I have time. And just communicating with charge nurses, doing educations to the NPs, to the CNSs, and involving the educators just so everyone is supported. So study startup. So my role begins at study startup whenever a trial comes to our Alpha Clinic inbox. I'm there involved from the beginning. I help review the MCAs, billing grids to make sure the financial person knows what goes to standard of care, what goes to insurance, or what goes to paid by the study. Attend the SIVs, obviously, make sure the right parties are at the SIVs. I like to do huddles frequently, especially before we go live with a trial, just to make sure everyone's aware of what they need to do and what their roles are. And those lab manuals will be the death of me, but trying to figure out what is research, what is a research study, or what's a research lab, what's a local lab, figuring out all that stuff. And then just making sure, honestly, that I understand the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Some of these diseases, honestly, I'm not that familiar with, and they're complicated. So I like to sit down with PIs when they have the time and just do deep dives to make sure that when we're screening and doing eligibility for patients, that the CRCs and I both understand what the IE criteria is even asking for. And then nursing worksheet. So this is nothing genius. It is just a template. It's what I created when I was at the bedside. I still use it now because it's the only thing I have found that keeps everyone, mainly myself, on track. So protocols are 200 pages. Sometimes there's a 20-page schedule of activities, and it just says for labs, draw hematology. Well, what does that mean? But then you read the appendix 4, right? And then it has the list of all the labs and it really wants a CVC with a diff or a tick count and all this other stuff. So my nursing worksheet is just a Word document that's now a template that the top right corner just has the study's title. And then under that, it has the PI. And then under that has the CRC and their contact numbers. And then underneath it has my name and my contact number. And then it's just a brief 4 bullet points study summary of the study. And then it is, how do you infuse the product? And this is targeted purely for mainly the nurses or NPs that are going to be touching those patients. So the infusion will just cover, what are the pre-meds? Tylenol and Benadryl, standard of care, or is the study asking for more? Those details will be on there. And then what type of line can we infuse this product for? Lots of times studies for who knows why say you can't infuse through a PIC or you can't do through a port. So if that's on there, if that's in the protocol or whatever the requirements for the protocol are for the infusion, that is also on there. And then what are the requirements? Is the patient required to be on telemonitoring? What are the requirements for the vital signs? Our standard in our hospital for vital signs is just before and after, and then every 15 minutes during the infusion, and then you're done, pretty much, as long as there's no side effects. Lots of times the protocols ask for before, after, every 15, and then every 30 or 15 or blah, blah, blah for an hour after. So those details will be on there as well. And then I also just take a breakdown. So the day the patient admits, admit day, what does the nurse have to do? So they can go through and check that. I do not keep this record. It's purely for their convenience to follow their workflow. And then day 0, if there's nothing between admit day and day 0, then there's nothing there. It's blank. We just do standard of care between those days. And then day 0 is obviously the cell infusion day. This is for one of our ORCA-T, Precision T trials. If any of you have worked on that, I'm sure lots of you have. So this was day 0 for ORCA-T. And then the vital sign requirements for that, if there were any particular lab requirements, and then X, Y, you guys can figure it out. Day plus 1, day plus 2, all the trial requirements for that. The other thing that is a pet peeve of mine that I try to be very clear on is I don't know what your guys' standard lab time draws are. Ours are 2,200 every single night. But if the protocol requires, right, that they need labs done before cell infusion on day 0 potentially is a different day than the 2,200, which was the day before. And if there's no window, then you're at a deviation, right? Because you have it, yes, you're going to do them that night, but if they require it before the infusion. So I always put on there if the labs can happen at the standard 2,200 time, or if they need to be held and waited till be drawn after midnight, because then it counts for before the infusion, right? So then these nursing worksheets, then I also go to EMR. In the snapshot button, I just copy and paste this, put it in the snapshot so that after admission, when the patient's being seen in clinic, the clinic nurses can go to this. And if they have questions about labs, they can see what's required for the labs. They can see on day plus 21, when they come back to clinic, all they need is a CBC, a CMP, and an EBV, and a CMV. So that's there. I hope that they use it as much as I think they use it. But it's also there as a reference for me too. And then of course we also do appointment notes too, but that's just stays in EMR in the snapshot for the patient. So no matter where they go, it's always there. And then the other thing that I do is when a patient is admitted, in the professional exchange, we do bedside report, but we also do a written report in EMR. So in the professional exchange on the Cardex, there's this primary nursing communication. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with that. I know everyone's EMR system is a little bit different, but anytime a patient is admitted to the inpatient unit on a trial, I'll go in and do something like this. When I just realize that, ignore the name there. This was not the original. This was the original PowerPoint presentation that I submitted. So sorry about that. I just do a brief blurb about the trial so that anybody inpatient can see it and they know what this patient, what trial they're on, what it's involved in. Because honestly, a lot of times the title of the trial doesn't really tell sometimes the bedside nurses what they need to know. So this is a little bit more. And then I'll also go in and put the labs, like, are there special lab requirements that are needed every day? I'll go in and say what the labs are. And then day 0, I'll put some details about day 0. And then I'll have my name and cell phone number there. And they also know to just secure chat me all the time. Okay, so there's a couple missing slides here, but I'm just going to talk because I think I have a few minutes. So the other thing I do is that when a patient is admitted to the inpatient unit, I'm also there working with the bedside or the BMT nurse coordinator to make sure, everything is done. That standard of care is done. The HAR is done. We have auth for everything. I'll send an email out to everybody and their mother a few days before the patient is admitted, mainly to the pharmacy, to the inpatient charge nurses, to the relief charge nurses, to the BMT nurse coordinator, and I'll include the protocol. Again, bullet pointed lines of what's required for that patient for that admission. Like upon admission, they will need a pregnancy test. Upon admission, they will need whatever the protocol requires. If we couldn't do it outpatient, and then details about the infusion. There's always questions about what type of line infusion, the infusion has to be done through, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to put that in the email. I'm also at the bedside at every infusion because I like it. I love doing, I don't want to let that go. I love doing CAR-T or stem cell infusions. So I'm at the bedside, again, just to feel that the nurse is supported. Every trial requires different tubing sometimes, or different lines, different vital sign requirements. So I just want to be there for the nurse and for the patient to make sure that they feel supported and that everything goes smoothly. And of course, like we've done infusions in the ICU. So I'm there with the ICU nurse too sometimes to make sure that they are also feel supported. And then I'll put in the orders. So, you know, most standard of care does not require a retic count every day, but a lot of protocols do. So after the physician has put in their orders, I'll go behind them and put in the trial required orders and then pend it to them and have them sign it. I'll also do that for the cell infusion orders to make sure everything is good and beautiful. But no matter how much I do, there's always still questions, which is fine because then it's always a learning lesson. And then the patient gets sent, then they go through their beautiful infusion, they get discharged, and then follow up, I'm there just making sure the patient has, again, all the protocol required visits done within window, all the labs are done. And I always tell the patients on day 0 that I turn into a chart stalker. I don't see them as much anymore after day 0, but I'm always in their chart looking at everything, making sure everything's beautiful. So that's just a few things that I have done. We also create order sets. I found order sets help a lot. So, you know, screening visits have a lot of labs and tests, and it gets cumbersome to go in and put each one of those individual labs in. So we'll just create order sets that will contain all the orders that you need for the study for screening. So then you can just type in, you know, whatever the name of your study is for screening, and then all those order sets pop up. It does take a lot of work to create those, but if you have a lot of patients being enrolled in the study, I think it's helpful. And then if for apheresis as well, like I'm always there for apheresis, supporting them, especially again, if it's a non-oncology patient, making sure all the source docs, not the source docs, but all the checklists and auto checklists and donor collection worksheets and IDMs are all done within window and X, Y, and Z. So sorry that this is kind of disjointed a little bit. I had my presentation was set out from screening to eligibility to collection to infusion, but this one is a little bit off. So I'm just kind of winging it. So that's pretty much it. I've just found that the nursing worksheets help communicate. Never assume. Every time I assume something, even if it's the simplest thing, it always gets me in the, you know what? And then just being there for the patient. I always make myself available as much as I can. And then just making yourself available to the bedside nurse or to the NP or to whoever is seeing that patient. And then just involving the NPs in the study. I always do an in-service to the team before a new study is, a new patient is admitted. Sometimes that in-service is just 1 or 2 people, but I don't care as long as someone has heard it. And then I just send emails out and I make my communication about that trial as easily available as possible, because I know that no bedside nurse is going to read. They don't even have access to find the protocols, to be honest. So they can't go into Encore and find the protocol. So all that stuff has to be provided to them. So I just try to make everything available to them as best as I can. So that is it. So thank you very much. And I'll be around if you guys have questions.